Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance Twitch stream again today. We have a very special guest joining us today. Everybody, please meet Dr. Oliver Ryder. He is the Director of Conservation Science for the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. He's had an incredible career learning all of these amazing things about wildlife and helping to conserve them. And we are so thrilled to have you on our Twitch stream today. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Ryder.
Thanks, Aaron. Well, there you see a couple of southern white rhinos right now live from the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. The San Diego Zoo Safari Park started 50 years ago, and southern white rhinos were one of the first species that arrived on site. We imported from South Africa about 24 southern white rhinos, and they had to be put in crates and put on ships and travel all the way to the port of Los Angeles and come to Escondido, California, to be released into native habitat that was fenced, that was the beginning of the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. We've had over 100 southern white rhinos born here, and so we've become the Safari Park has become a world center for breeding endangered species. So it's a kind of a overcast day here. So the rhinos are not seeking out shade. They're happy to be right, out there. We see only 2 of them. There are about a dozen animals in the enclosure, and we have other rhinos in the safari park. We have greater one-horned rhinos. We don't mix them up in the same area. You're looking at an area that's about 100 acres that has not only these rhinos in it, but it's got gazelles and Cape buffalo and giraffes and lots of things that you may see walking by. There in the background, you can see some large animals moving. I think those are Indian gaur, but I can't really tell exactly from the blow up. But it's an amazing place, the safari park, and from it we really showed, before those rhinos came to the safari park in 1972. I think they actually arrived in 71 before the park opened. But before they came, across all zoological institutions that had white rhinos, there was very little reproduction. But when we put 20 white rhinos together out in a large enclosure, we had a baby explosion. And there is nothing cuter than a baby rhinoceros. Maybe we'll get to see some, but they are amazing. And rhinos are fascinating animals. They're mammals. They have hair on their skin. It's easiest to see on the ends of their tails or in their ears, but if you get up really close to their skin, you can see little hair follicles and hairs that they have. And they are in the tree of mammals. They're in the what's called the order Perissodactyla. That group includes horses and tapirs. These are odd-toed ungulates. Rhinos have 3 toes, and they are ballerinas on those toes. They may weigh 4,000 pounds, but they are unbelievably agile. And if we were to startle one of those rhinos, or like maybe you'll see a crane, an African crane fly overhead or something, they would be up on their feet instantly. They can just come to life, and they can start running in a very short distance. Just they can get up to 30 miles an hour. So I think
for such a big animal.
I think they can beat a Tesla off the line.
Don't tell Tesla that.
We don't want to have a drag race with them.
No, but are they quiet when they run because they're so dainty on their toes? Can you hear them coming?
They can really run, and we've probably got some pictures of young rhinos. I don't know if they're in your bag of tricks here, Aaron.
We've
But
got lots of tricks.
we've got pictures of young, few months old rhinos galloping, and it's just amazing. And they just love to take off. Ah, there's some young rhinos.
Yeah, and I would love if you could share with everyone. I know these are all baby rhinos are special, of course, but these two are especially special. And I was wondering if you can share with everybody a little bit about their backstory.
Right. Well, this isn't live, right? This is video of Future and Edward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Future and Edward, they're the little young ones, just touching noses there. And they're special because they are the first rhinos produced by artificial insemination in North America. Ah, look at them run. Aren't they great?
They're so cute. We love rhino zoomies.
Yep, they are. Zoom, zoom, zoom. Look at them go. And they are not clumsy. They are not clumsy. Their sight, they don't need to see very well. And in their habitat, there's a lot of shrubbery and bushes. So seeing at a large distance isn't really an advantage to them. Hearing at a large distance, hearing sensitivity is important for them. Look at those big ears.
Yeah, they're like satellites almost.
They can turn them around, and they communicate over long distances with very low frequency sound. Individuals contact each other, and we can't hear the sound because it's below the threshold of our hearing. It's like 30 hertz. It's like super low bass. And but you can feel it. If I've been in Africa at a water hole, and you can feel the noise of the rhinos
like in your chest.
Yeah. So so these two babies are and they're grown now. Actually, I saw Edward recently, and he weighs almost 4,000 pounds. So he's a
big boy.
He's a big boy now.
Yeah, and they don't live out in the field habitat. They're in a special spot at the safari park called the Rhino Rescue Center.
Right. We have that's another population of rhinos that we have habitat for, and that's a very special group. These guys, this is some video, I think, of them meeting, for the first time. And white rhinos are social. They live together in social groups, and other rhinos may be more solitary and less social, but white rhinos are social, and these rhinos are growing up around animal care specialists that are working with them to advance our work in genetic rescue, and we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
So hi, Twitch. I hope you're digging it, because it's fun to be here live with you and talking about rhinos. And the reason that we're working on them here at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance is because their place in nature is so threatened. There's two species of rhinos in Africa. They're called white rhinos and black rhinos, and it's not because of color. It's sort of another story. And in the white rhinoceros, there's two different forms: the southern white rhino and the northern white rhino. And we'll get to the northern white rhino later. But in Asia, there's three species of rhinos. There's the Javan rhino that exists in only one population on the island of Java, and it's 30 individuals left, 30 to 50. Nobody knows exactly. And they've been at low numbers like that for a long time. The Sumatran rhinoceros used to be on the mainland of Southeast Asia, used to be in Malaysia and Vietnam, and it's now only on the island of Sumatra. And there's a big controversy. Google it, look up in the news, because there's just a report that said the numbers are less than 50, and the Indonesian government takes exception with that number and kicked out the people that published the report, said you're not welcome to go back to Indonesia. So rhinos are as special as they are and as unique as they are, the reason that San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance is so interested in them is because there's an enormous role that conservation science and animal care and animal health management has to play in keeping them from becoming extinct. Rhinoceroses are an amazing radiation of mammals. At one point, 30 or 50 million years ago, there were like 80 species of rhinoceros around the world, and the tallest land
wow.
the tallest land mammal that ever lived was a rhinoceros. It
Taller
was
than giraffes?
twice as tall as giraffes. They were
Wow.
12 feet tall at the shoulder, and they had long necks, and the neck could be 30 feet off the ground. They ate the tops of trees.
Oh my gosh.
So a human could walk comfortably underneath and never touch the belly. And they were vegetarians, but I wouldn't if I wouldn't want to.
Don't risk it.
But no human will ever have the chance, and we don't we don't even have enough material from them to do DNA analysis, but maybe somebody will do that in the future. So we're committed to saving rhinos and other species, and we're famous for some of our conservation work, and especially here at the safari park. Oh, it's such a nice day. Look at the animals out there. You can take a tour of this place. You are contained in a tram that drives through this habitat around the sides of it. And it's one of the kinds of safaris we offer.
And everyone's really excited that you're here with us, Dr. Ryder. We're getting a ton of people are just amazed by all of the facts that you're sharing. And so if anybody has questions for Dr. Ryder too, there's people on. They're here. It's not just you and I, surprisingly. Yes, there's people tuned in. They're very excited. But yeah, anyone, if you have questions for Dr. Ryder, please drop them in and I will pass them along to him. But yeah, we're talking all about conservation today, which is so important. And I think a lot of people maybe know, some of the threats that face rhinos. A lot of them are hunted for their horns, but can you maybe speak to that a little bit more about what's threatening them and what we're doing to help conserve them?
Well, as charismatic animals, people like to hunt them. That's against the law everywhere. Well, almost everywhere now. And but their horns have been especially valued as curiosities, as objects of power, and in some cases suggested that they could be used for medicinal purposes, and that created a demand for them, especially as human populations in the ranges, in the places where rhinos lived, human welfare increased, so that there was people that had wealth. It was a status symbol to own a dagger handle that had a dagger that had a handle made of rhinoceros horn, or to just have a rhinoceros horn, like on your coffee table, to show that you had connections, that you were rich, that you were a person of note or importance, and they are they're part of an internet. The rhinoceros horn is part of a global wildlife trafficking network of cartels. The people that trade in wildlife parts, elephant ivory, rhino horns, the scales of an unusual mammal called a pangolin that has scales. The value of these things has created a black market, and many of the same organizations that traffic in these parts also traffic in are alleged to traffic in drugs and even do human trafficking. So it's a business, uh, an illegal business that is funding that has funded, civil insurrectionists and militias um, and it's in since in 1960 there were estimated to be 60,000 rhinos in Kenya, and
Okay.
today,
And what about now?
well, they went down to as low as 300.
Oof.
So it decreased from 60,000 to 300 in 25 years. So it used to
Yeah.
be that that you would see rhinos all the time on safari in Kenya, and black rhinos, and you just don't see them anymore. All the rhinos that stood out in the open to say, "Here I am," well, they disappeared.
Yeah.
The rhinos that are
And
left, ones that are secretive and come out to eat at night, and they're largely in areas that have protection in them. So rhinos are safe today where they're in high security areas with really strong anti-poaching patrols.
yeah, and just to kind of touch on the smaller population size, Bad Floof, one of our friends on Twitch, wants to know, with such small populations, is genetic diversity becoming a problem in any of the rhino populations?
Aren't you a smart person there asking a good question? That's exactly what we
Bad
work on.
Floof coming through.
That's exactly what we're working on, is looking at the amount of genetic diversity, and we've done a lot of studies on 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 the divergence of all of the members of the rhinoceros family. I told you about 5 species, and we've looked at the divergence between white rhinos. Um, the southern white rhino went through a bottleneck a century ago. A bottleneck means its numbers were reduced greatly. There had been commercial hunting and uh, sport hunting, and rhinoceros numbers disappeared to the point where people thought they might even be extinct, southern white rhinoceroses. And then a population was found in an area that was very thick scrub habitat, and had a lot of tsetse flies. It wasn't a great place that people like to hang out, and it turns out that it was fine for the rhinos, but there were about 30 to 50 left in this one habitat area that was called Schluium filosi. And
What? Can you say that again?
Schluium filosi. It's spelled with H's and L's and W's. It's a Zulu word,
Okay.
and uh, they were protected there, and their numbers increased, and they were then, as they basically filled up that habitat area, methods were developed to move them. And moving an animal as big as a rhino, you remember they're wild. You're not going to just coax them or put them on a leash or walk them into a crate. So it required the development of a series of chemical immobilizations that to safely put them into a recumbent condition where were still breathing and were still healthy, but that they could be basically uh, picked up and moved into a crate, and then given an antidote for the immobilization drug, and they would wake up in a crate. And if you Google rhino translocations, you can see some pictures of this, and you might even see pictures where they immobilized a rhino and they can't get a car, or a big truck and a crane into where the rhino went down, so they bring in a helicopter and tie the rhino
Gosh.
up legs and pick the rhino up under a helicopter and fly it to a place where the truck is. But that technology allowed moving rhinos around into habitat they'd formerly occupied, and the number grew. And the number grew to be so large that by the 1970s, South Africa said, maybe we should be sharing our rhinos with the rest of the world. And that's how we got them at the San Diego Zoo Safari Park. But southern white rhinos went through this genetic bottleneck, but then they increased their numbers up to 20,000. 20,000 from 30 to 50.
Yeah,
But
so that's way better than it was, but still not where it should be, right?
Their maximum rate of reproduction can be very large if you keep them at appropriate low densities in good habitat with good food quality, good forage for them. But the numbers is down below 20,000 now because of the poaching epidemic that's been taking place. So African governments in Kenya and South Africa and Tanzania and other places have devoted enormous resources to trying to protect the few rhinos that are left.
Yeah, someone mentioned seeing photos of rhinos being guarded by in the field. So I know that's just part of it.
Right, and 24 hours a day, basically. The northern white rhinoceros is also called the Nile Rhinoceros. So it lives north, of course, of the southern white rhino, and in the parts of the headwaters of the Nile, it's marshy habitat in Chad, Uganda, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And their numbers were decreasing in the 1970s and 1980s at the same time that southern white rhino numbers were increasing because of the protection. In these other countries, there wasn't a similar effort to protect the rhinos, and their numbers declined. And we started to study the difference between northern and southern white rhinos. Are they different? Are they the same thing? We started to do that work in the 1980s and showed it was very easy to tell them apart by their DNA. And they'd been separated for many thousands of years. And in order to do these genetic studies, we established and froze cell cultures. We could take a skin biopsy, a small piece of skin. Rhino skin's really thick in some places, but in other places it's thin, and you can get a small piece of skin from an immobilized rhino. You don't walk up to a rhino.
I was just gonna say, you got to explain that process because
yeah, it takes a big team to chemically immobilize a rhino, but because of all of this work in translocation and in zoo medicine, it's a safe and well-established procedure. And so it was possible for us to get these skin biopsies from northern white rhinos and to bring them to the lab here at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance and grow those cells from skin biopsies to expand their numbers into millions of cells, which we would then divide into a number of vials and freeze them with what we call cryoprotectants, solutions that stop the cells from dying when they're frozen. If you put a piece of lettuce in the freezer, you know that it all wilts. And that's because ice crystals have formed within the cells and broken the cells open so that the cells are dead and it wilts. So you have to protect animal cells so they can be frozen, and that technology was developed.
Yeah. And so
here we have pictures of people growing cells in the lab, passing cells. So you can start from a few cells, and then you can divide the number of cells that are in one flask and put them into two, and in that way expand their numbers. So we established cell cultures from 12 northern white rhinos. And while that work was being done in the 1980s and 1990s, the number in the wild was, this is, we write the names of them. This is pictures of our frozen zoo.
Yeah, and can you just, for people who might not know what it is, can you just elaborate on the frozen zoo and what we do there?
The frozen zoo is an amazing repository. There's nothing quite like it in the world. It contains living cells. These are skin cells, or they are reproductive cells like sperm and eggs in some embryos. And they're stored at minus 297 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. And that keeps them basically in suspended animation. So they can last there for years and years and years and be thawed out and then resume their function. Like one of the rhinos that we showed you, Edward, the larger one, the cute little baby rhino, he was produced by artificial insemination from semen that had been frozen, that had been in the frozen zoo. And so there's a northern white rhino. This is what a vial of cells look like. There are a couple of million cells in there. And so it's a repository that we've been saving cells for since 1975.
Yeah,
so,
and in addition to rhinos, I know, there's tons of different species in there, but we shared a really exciting discovery last year that I'm wondering if you can also share with everybody that has to do with California condors.
I'd love to do that, Erin. So, but let me just finish about the frozen zoo.
Okay.
Because there's cells of over 10,000 individual birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians in the frozen zoo. It's the largest collection of its kind, and it's the best characterized and the most utilized. It doesn't sit there like a time capsule. We can take cells out and study them, and it's used for a really wide variety of studies that are now changing our notions of the way that the tree of life evolved, and are opening a new window of understanding, because these cells can be used for sequencing the genomes of species. And I'll get back to that in a minute, but we're going to talk about condors. So the San Diego Zoo Safari Park is notable for its rhinos and for many other species, but one of them is California condors. California condors are the largest birds in North America. They have an over 9-foot wingspan. When you see one in the sky at a distance, you're first going to confuse it with an airplane. They are amazing birds of the wind.
Thunderbirds.
They soar with their large wings. They have the intelligence to find where there are thermals. Oh, here are Przewalski's horses. Got to interrupt myself.
We're just making you jump all around, Dr. Ryder.
Yeah, well, this is what happens on Twitch. We twitch, and I twitched when I saw those Przewalski's horses. They just walked into the webcam there, and we gotta give them. And there's an Javan Bantang that's just exiting to the left, and there are those two Przewalski's horses. Przewalski's horses are a completely different lineage from the horses that all domestic horse breeds belong to, whether they're Shetland ponies, thoroughbreds, American standard breds, quarter horses, fjord ponies, or Clydesdales, or Percherons. They are a completely different lineage. All domestic horses have 64 chromosomes. Przewalski's horses have 66 chromosomes. Now, from DNA studies, we know their lineage has been separated from the lineage producing domestic horses for tens of thousands of years, and that differentiation started over 100,000 years ago. And Przewalski's horses went extinct in the wild. They were discovered in Mongolia. People in Mongolia knew they were there. They were discovered by Western science at the end of the 1800s.
Okay.
A scientific paper was published in 1881 by a Russian zoologist studying them, who had who'd been sent skins and skulls of Przewalski's horses, or these horses, from the Mongolian Gobi Desert. And he studied them and said, this is a new species of horse, and it was named Equus przewalskii after the explorer who who collected their material, Nikolai Przewalski.
Yeah,
And
that's another tongue twister
one thing, they're just
for me.
great. They have erect manes, lack of
Przewalski.
forelock. They have a dorsal stripe. They're buckskin dun coloration. And now they walked off the image there. We're looking at a Javan Banteng right now.
They have a mind of their own.
Yeah, they to go. This is a safari park. They get to go where they want to.
Hmm.
Um,
But those two
and
are special, right? That's Kurt and Holly
Yeah,
out
I'm going to
there.
get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, they're special, and but to understand how special they are, you have to know that all Przewalski's horses trace back to um, uh, 11 animals that came out of the wild at the turn of the 20th century, in the last years of the 1800s and the first years of the 1900s, except for one female who came out of the wild in the 1950s. So, and now there's more than 2,000 Przewalski's horses, and they've been saved because they were able to be bred under human care in zoos. And in the meantime, they went extinct in the wild. So now they're being reintroduced. Aha, they're
Oh.
there. They're there. You can see the two of them. And there's a male named Kurt and a female named Holly. And they're both about 2 years old. And and because of this long history of Przewalski's horses, they lost a lot of genetic diversity over many, many generations, more than a dozen generations of horses in captivity. And because of a population bottleneck at the Second World War that reduced their population, they have a fascinating history, but they are now have limit. They've lost genetic diversity, but we've been saving cells like from biopsies, like I explained for rhinos, from Przewalski's horses.
Do you know what kind of
Since the
cells?
1970s.
Is it just like skin cells, hair cells, or
Skin cells, their name is fibroblasts. They're the same kinds of cells that if you like cut your finger, they'll produce the scar tissue.
okay, yeah.
They're present throughout your body, basically. But they're from our standpoint, their virtue is we know how to grow them. We know how to take the skin biopsy, and we know how to put them into a kind of a solution that provides all of the nutrients they need to grow. And so we've frozen a lot of cells of Przewalski's horses. And 2 years ago, we looked at the collection of Przewalski's horse cells we had, and said, if all of the animals from whom these cells were obtained were alive, which ones would be most important to use for breeding in order to preserve the genetic diversity of the species? And there was one male who stood out, and his name was Kaporovich. He was born in the United Kingdom in 1970. He came to the Minnesota Zoo in 1975. And in 1980, we got a skin biopsy here in San Diego that went into the frozen zoo. We studied his chromosomes. He had 66 chromosomes. He's a good Przewalski's horse. And the cells sat there for 40 years until we started a collaboration with a conservation biotech nonprofit called Revive and Restore, and the world's largest commercial cloning company called Viagen. And from those cells from Kaporovich, a Przewalski's horse was cloned, and you're looking at him. He was named Kurt, after Kurt Benerschke, the founder of the Frozen Zoo, a phenomenal physician, scientist who was interested in conservation and changed the trajectory of the San Diego Zoo forever.
Yeah.
And now Kurt was born to a surrogate mother, because he was cloned. He was cloned using an egg from a domestic horse, and a cell from the frozen zoo was put into that egg, And that developed into an early stage embryo that had to be transferred into a female that could gestate it, so a surrogate mother. And the gestational surrogate was an American quarter horse. And she was in Texas, and he was born in late in the year in Texas. And they had a hard winter that year in Texas. They had a big snowstorm and caused a lot of power outages.
Oh, I remember
and
that.
Snow fell everywhere, and Kurt was the happiest horse in Texas.
He was right at home.
His ancestral lineage goes back to the harsh conditions of the Gobi Desert, and he was out rolling around in the snow. So because he, most Przewalski's horses, I think he's the first, that that didn't have wasn't born into a herd of Przewalski's horses.
Right.
His mother was a quarter horse, his surrogate mother. His real mother was Koporovich's mother.
Right.
But it's very important for him to know to behave like a Przewalski's horse. So he was brought at a young age to the safari park and met up with Holly. That's the female that you've seen in his companion. And she's teaching him how to be a Przewalski's horse. And they're growing up together. And when he's not full grown yet. And he will be sexually mature before he's full grown. He needs to get full grown, and he needs to have the confidence of a stallion to go into a herd of Przewalski's horse mares. The Przewalski's horses are bred like wild horses. They exist with bands of females and stallions that compete to take over groups of females. And not only do the stallions have to compete with other stallions, they have to be dominant over the females, the mares. And that's not a task for a teenager. So Kurt has to grow up.
He's got some growing to do.
And gain his mettle. But for right now, he's enjoying being out on the grassy open spaces of the safari park. And you can go there and you can look at him on the webcam. You can go there and see him. And he's a very, very unusual animal. And the point here is not just to make an unusual animal. The point here is that he can do something that no other Przewalski horse on earth can do, which is bring back genetic variation that's been lost from the population.
Yeah, just so important.
That's his mission. That's his mission in life, and that's why we've invested in these partnerships and undertaken that this is after he breeds and has offspring, it will be the crowning achievement of our years working with Przewalski's horses, and a testimony to having started the Frozen Zoo in 1975, and a practical demonstration of the power of using advanced genetic and reproductive technologies to rescue endangered species from extinction.
Yeah, and I have to say, Dr. Ryder, because we love the pea horses, but people in the chat are like, the suspense has been building. They need to know what we discovered about the condors.
Yeah, well, okay, so cue the condor. Oh, there's one.
There you go.
Look at it fly. Look at those, if I've had the privilege of being in condor habitat, and having them fly overhead. Now you can do that too, because there's over 300 of them back in the wild. They're in the Grand Canyon. They're in Big Sur, California. Some from the Grand Canyon decide to fly off and look for new territory, and they went to Zion Park in Utah and have nested there. And in 2 years recently, they produced chicks in Zion.
Oh, good. Yay.
So all California condors. Well, which ones are the boys and which ones are the girls? Well, I'm asking.
They look the same, don't they?
They look the same, just like parrots. You can't tell the boys and the girls. by looking at them. So when the California condor was reduced down to a low of only 20, 21 animals, it was really important to know how many of them were males and how many were females. And when they all were brought into managed care, all brought into zoos, because they had gone down to as low as 4 in the wild. I think
Crazy.
that's the right number. We needed to pair them for breeding. So we needed to know which ones were the males and which ones were the females. And so we developed tests to do that. And at first it was a kind of a laborious test that took 36 hours. It
Oh,
involved studying chromosomes. And now we do it with molecular methods using the polymerase chain reaction, or PCR. And we have students that come here from high schools that learn how to sex condors in an afternoon in a molecular genetics learning module that we have here in our community engagement with our community engagement team. So our laboratory here, where I'm speaking from, is the laboratory that identifies the sex of all California condor chicks. And there've now been every chick and every adult that came from the wild is got a reference in a stud book.
okay.
And there's now over 1,000. I think it's now over 1,100 entries. So that's how, and there's now over 300 condors flying in the wild.
Very good.
But we need to determine the sex of all of those individuals. And then when they were released back into the wild, we needed to know when they were nesting who their parents were, because we wanted to have the stud book be correct, but we also wanted to learn about the behavior and breeding structure of condors in the wild, and that had never been possible before they went extinct in the wild. It wasn't possible because of the difficulty of observing them and their wide ranging, and because the techniques for the parentage analysis, like 23andMe or Ancestry, just weren't available.
Right.
But we developed those resources for California condors.
And like the
And
the team at the safari park created that, or was it like a partnership, or was it you? Like, how did
a big partnership to do all of this work, because there's multiple institutions that keep California condors, and the recovery program for the species is under the auspices of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But in the beginning, we didn't know how old the condors were or how long they might live. Would the animals we brought in from the wild die of old age before they reproduced? And what if we inadvertently bred together close relatives?
right?
So we used DNA testing to identify who was most closely related to who, after we'd figured out who the boys were and who the girls were. And that information was used to structure the pairing of birds, which birds would breed with which birds. It's like computer dating. And
Yeah.
that was done in the 1980s. Now we've done whole genome sequencing. So the California condor is the first endangered species for which the breeding management is done by genome sequencing of the founders. And I'm getting to, stay tuned.
It's okay. You're building the suspense and the tension. This is good.
Really cool thing here, and I'm building up for it. So we'll be back right after this commercial break. I'm just kidding. We don't do commercial breaks.
Maybe we should.
But I'm gonna take a drink of water before I tell you the
Please
rest.
do. Yes. I'll have one too.
Well, I hope you're having fun out there, Twitchers. So we're breeding the California condors. They're reintroduced back into the wild. We're seeing pairs. We're seeing birds in nests where there's 2 males and a female that are hanging out at the nest, or 2 females and a male hanging out at the nest. Well, what's going on? Who's the mom? Who's the dad? So we found out that happens, and that they form single sex pairs sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the male, and when there's a pair, a male and a female at a nest, sometimes the male at the nest is not the father of the chick. So although all of the reference books said that California condors were monogamous, That's not the case. And another thing that happened because we were doing all of this parentage analysis is we found out that California condor eggs could develop without having a father. It's
See,
called
that is
parthenogenesis.
crazy. That's crazy.
So a female lays an egg and it develops, and there's never any male contribution in it. And that can't happen in mammals for a reason that we'll twitch about another time. But in birds and reptiles, that can happen. And now that we have these methods that allow us to really identify it, people are finding it happens more often. But it was not expected. It had never been described. And it's a whole new family of birds where it's been shown that parthenogenetic development can occur. And it didn't just happen once. It happened twice that we noted with chicks that were live, and they were living a while before we knew they were parthenogenetically developed.
Yeah.
And then recently we found a third one. So this is part of condor reproduction.
Yeah.
Haven't found any parthenotes yet. That's a bird that develops parthenogenetically is called a parthenote. You guys can make a T-shirt out of that. And we haven't found yet any wild parthenotes produced by wild free-living birds. But because we get the samples from free-living birds to identify their sex, we can continue to look for this. So my colleagues just finished an analysis of all of the young of this year. So far we haven't found any more, but if we do,
you gotta tell
I'll
us.
I'll let Aaron and Taylor know, and we'll come back on and update you.
Yeah.
So, any questions about parthenogenesis?
If somebody asked, hold on. It's not parthenogenesis specific, but it is about condors. It's Bad Floof again. Bad Floof's coming through with really good questions. Do they, or I guess do scientists try to split up condors if they've paired with family members like they've done with Mexican gray wolves?
Well, we tried to avoid it, but with some further testing, we found out that, yeah, there was a pair of birds we thought were unrelated that were closely related, and we broke up the pair. The California condor population is in a core that has the genetic representation of the entire gene pool of the species, which has been through a genetic bottleneck. And we're analyzing that in detail to look at the deleterious genes they might have and so forth now with the powerful techniques of genomics. But because they are a small population, we want to manage them so that we minimize the loss of genetic variation. So that requires making the pairings of birds, specifying the pairs of birds. Luckily, most of the time we say, oh, number 238 male, you look really good with number 724 female. And you put them together and they decide that they'll make chicks.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it a lot easier for us, because in some species you can say, oh, you guys are a good match, but the animals themselves don't agree.
Yeah. And Dr. Ryder, I feel like we could stream with you for hours and hours, but I do know that you are busy and we are somehow coming up to the end of our hour with you. So is there anything else you want people to just take away from our conversation today about conservation, genetics, what people can do to help kind of support this work?
Well, I hope that, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah.
I hope out there in the Twitchiverse you're having as much fun with this as we are. And, the science is contributing. Science is a hopeful intervention for preserving species. And for those of us that work here with the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, it's a privilege and an honor to work in this arena. And we're really fortunate that we have the capacity and the capability to do it, because we're now, what is 116-year-old organization, something like that.
Yeah.
And we're in it for the long run. We're in it to have all life thrive. We understand that animals and plants and people all have to get along together to make a future for our descendants on this planet. And anybody out there is interested in science and using it to help save biodiversity, to contribute to endangered species conservation, I say go for it.
Yeah, it's so inspiring and rewarding. And, we hear a lot of doom and gloom about this topic, and species being lost, but it's so exciting to hear all of these breakthroughs that are also happening, and it gives us hope. And it was just really, really great to talk to you today, Dr. Ryder, and we really appreciate you joining us. Hopefully we can do this again with you soon and keep diving into all of these topics, because there's just so much to kind of talk about and share. But for everyone tuning in, thank you for your questions, for your support, for joining us on Twitch. We'll be back again next week. We'll be live on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So we look forward to seeing you there. And Dr. Ryder, have a great afternoon.
Hey, thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.